Good morning, homeschoolers. Good evening, wherever you happen to be. I'm Kim Kautzer with WriteShop, and I am here to talk to you about your struggling writer and the issues that you have teaching writing at home. This week, we posted a poll on the Facebook group to find out what some of your struggles are with teaching writing, and there are many. And some of you ticked all the boxes and some of you just ticked a few, but it told me a lot of things. It told me that your kids are wrestling with writing and you're struggling with teaching it. And so I hope that this morning I can give you some encouragement, some tips, and kind of talk about some of the misconceptions that we have about what it means when our kids say that they don't like to write. So some of the top things in this poll, number one, way at the top, was my child hates writing. That was followed by several different things. For example, my kid struggles with spelling or reading or grammar, or my kid can't write or won't write independently. My child has an amazing vocabulary, but he can't seem to figure out how to get those good ideas out of the head and onto the paper. Some of you mentioned that your kids think writing is boring. Some of you talked about it being a battleground on your in your homeschool. Hi Donna, hi Misty. And so, yeah, and the whole blank page thing is just an overwhelming thing oftentimes when you are trying to help your kids teach writing. There are also some issues that plague moms, and we're going to get to those a little bit later, but I want to start by jumping right into talking about some of the things that we are dealing with when our kids say that they hate writing. So this is either you hear it, Mom, I hate writing, or you observe it. Your child just doesn't want to sit down and do it. They run away, they cry, they melt down. How many of you have had the meltdowns over writing? Raise your hand. I know we dealt with it with my son in particular. But what does I hate writing really mean? What are they saying inside when they tell you that they hate writing? Or when you tell me, when you come to my convention booth, or you're at the Top Picks conference and you are, posting a question, and that's the first thing you say is, well, my kid hates writing. But really, that's a kind of a broad statement. So let's break it down, think a little bit about what we're actually saying. So Mom says, my daughter hates writing. So then I might say, can she express herself verbally? Can she tell stories? Can she explain something to you? And Mom responds, I can't keep her quiet. She just yak, yak, yak all day long. And that is the thing that triggers for me what the real issue is that we're dealing with. So it's not that your child hates writing. It's not that you have to drop back 3 levels because your child has gotten behind or just doesn't seem to be progressing or can't get those ideas on paper. There's something completely different when they say, I hate writing. It doesn't mean your kids don't have ideas. There's a misconception here. It means they simply hate putting words on paper. And there are a boatload of reasons, but it's usually not a lack of ideas. Sometimes it can be, and there are kids who really struggle with processing issues or expressive language, and I understand that. I'm usually, in this context, going to speak to the general population of homeschoolers who just have issues with kids who can't get the ideas out. But it can be a special need. It can be a processing issue. And there are things that I will talk about that will address some of that in general. But what is the big misconception? The misconception is they hate putting words on paper. So there are a couple of reasons, well, several reasons for this. One is that no matter what your child's age, writing skills tend to lag behind their verbal abilities. So if they're competent at telling stories or even speaking, think about your 2-year-old. How many of you have chatterbox 2-year-olds? You would not expect your 2-year-old to pick up a pencil and write down what's in his head. If you have a talkative 7-year-old or 8-year-old, they may have loads of ideas, but they may still be struggling a bit with putting them on paper. Your speaking vocabulary is different from your writing vocabulary, and generally speaking, your speaking vocabulary far exceeds the ability to write. Your speaking vocabulary is composed of thousands more words than the typical writing vocabulary. So bear that in mind every time you think, my kid hates writing. What is it that is the glitch? And it's usually not that they don't have ideas. I'm going to keep coming back to that. So another thing is that your kids forget what they have to say. So they're really great at thinking of ideas. You can ask them questions and they can spin those things around and tell you things back. But when they try to write it down, it takes them a while sometimes. They either can't hold that idea long enough in their head for it to get to paper, because it is a process. There is quite a lot involved in that, getting something, a thought, from our brain all the way down to the paper. There's a lot of neuron firing and stuff that has to happen for the words to make their way to paper. And sometimes your kids just aren't there yet. So if they forget what they want to say because they can't write fast enough to hold those thoughts, that can be part of the I hate writing problem. How many of you have perfectionists? Raise your hand. Perfectionists are their own worst enemy when it comes to writing, because they don't want to put a thing on paper unless it's going to be perfect. So a lot of you mentioned that your kids struggle with spelling, grammar, punctuation. If your child is obsessed with writing something perfectly and yet they're still young, or they just haven't grasped some of those concepts, what's going to happen? They're going to sit there and stare at that piece of paper or their blank screen, and they're not going to put anything down because it won't be perfect the first time. So that is something else you're going to be dealing with, and that's part of the mantra, I hate writing. Okay, so another problem many of you mentioned is that your kids aren't writing independently. Some kids can't write independently. Maybe they're just immature. My son is a really good example of that. He had a combination of immaturity and some physical challenges. And that's another one. There could be physical issues, pencil grip, arm-shoulder tension. For Ben, he had both of those. And another thing that he struggled with was if his right hand, he was right-handed, if his right hand crossed the midline, in other words, if his paper was on the opposite side of his handedness, it would throw off his writing. So we had to make sure that he kept his paper in the right place and his hand stayed on the right-hand side. This is a glitch he outgrew. It didn't last him his entire life. He's now 35. He will be on Tuesday. And so it was something that he outgrew. But when he was younger, we had to adjust and adapt to make it work because he couldn't write very well. And because of that, it made him resistant to writing. He was a perfectionist. He was immature. He was delayed in all of his 3 R's. But yet he was a talker and fantastic at telling you back what he learned, telling you stories, answering questions. He was a master at that. What do you do if you have a child like that? all their ideas stay locked up in their brains until they're 15, 17, when they can finally write them down. You don't want to miss those opportunities, Mom. So you want to capture those while you can. So that'll be something else that we talk about in just a minute. For a lot of your kids, their skills are just still developing. And I'm talking about handwriting skills. And this is part of that misconception. When your kids say, or you observe that they hate writing, it's often tied to the pencil. It's not the ability or inability to express ideas. It's that whole getting it down on paper. So their skills, if they're still developing, can take years. And it can be discouraging. And you can watch your kids and think, why can't they do this? And for some, it's just immaturity. So years ago, one of the most encouraging books I ever read was called Better Late Than Early by Dr. Raymond Moore. And it's still around. You can still find it. But it really encouraged me as a mom of a struggling boy, because my girls were fine. They were easy to teach. They were intuitive writers. They wrote all kinds of stuff without any prompting or encouragement from me. Whether that was writing stories or keeping a diary or journal or writing plays or songs or, whatever. They had pencil in hand all the time. That was not the case with Ben. And so I had to kind of figure out how to make that happen. And Better Late Than Early was a good encouragement to me, because Dr. Moore said sometimes it takes kids, especially boys, till they're about 10, until they are ready to learn. And I noticed that with Ben when he was a little older than 10, excuse me, for some of these things, but when he was ready, boom, everything just took off. And he was in more towards early to mid high school when those things really started to all come together. Puberty was a factor, just getting involved in a debate club through our homeschool group, taking writing. Well, that was around the time that we were developing our upper level WriteShop. That was the first program that we developed, and it just kind of all came together for him. But he needed time to mature, and your kids may need that time as well. So those are the kids who can't write, and then you have the kids who won't write. It's often tied to lack of confidence. It's that whole perfectionist thing. And for some, the effort just doesn't seem to be worth it. So you've got the kids who aren't writing independently yet. Excuse me again. Water to the rescue. And so these are your problems. Basically, what you guys talked about in your poll, with the comments you made underneath the poll, were telling me that your kid struggles with reading, spelling, punctuation. Your kids don't write independently. They have an amazing vocabulary. They have great ideas. You just don't see results on paper. Writing is a battleground. Tears, anger, wadding up of papers, and dealing with that ugly blank page. So what are you going to do? What are some solutions? And I want to offer some things that really I found over, 25 years of doing this, teaching writing, that there are some tips that work no matter what kind of learner you have. Whether you have a child with special needs, whether you have a child who can't put pencil to paper, whether you have a child who's got great ideas but needs some encouragement getting them written down. There are just some simple things that you can do. One of them is to break assignments into chunks. Why is this helpful? What does this do for your child? How many of you are perfectionists yourself? For perfectionists, we are often, notice I said we? We are often plagued by the magnitude of our task. And so if it's too big and too overwhelming, it's easy to set aside. We just don't want to start anywhere. And I used to have this thing about my house. If I didn't have time to clean my whole house in a day so that everything looked good all at once, I just didn't start. And then everything would pile up like a train wreck, and pretty soon, I had to lose a few days to get things all back in order. So what did I discover? It's better to clean the bathrooms when I've got some time, and then do some dusting, and then another time do some vacuuming, and then give the kitchen a good clean after dinner or whatever. It didn't have to happen all at once. And if it happened in steps, then within a few days my house looked decent, even though it didn't all happen on Thursday morning. If you're homeschooling and you've got younger kids and you don't have a lot of help getting the house in order, you've got to do it in bits and pieces. The same thing goes for teaching writing. Your kids look at this assignment. They have to write an adventure story, or they have to write an essay, a 5-paragraph essay, a compare and contrast. Whether your child is kindergarten or high school, you give them an assignment, they are going to be like deer in the headlights, because it just feels huge to them. So you need to break it down into bits and pieces to make it easier for them. In WriteShop, we give a schedule that helps parents break down writing assignments for their kids. In the younger levels, WriteShop Primary, WriteShop Junior, the schedules are 3 weeks long per lesson. And over the course of 3 weeks, you're just working 3 days a week. So that's one thing that's going to help your family, is not feeling the pressure to write every single day. You don't also have to write 4 hours at a sitting. It's another reason to spread out an assignment over time. So you have a schedule that may give you the first 3 days, you're just introducing the writing lesson. So what does that mean? You're playing pre-writing games to teach skills. You're doing maybe your teaching time. In WriteShop, we call that guided writing for the pre-writers and the young writers in early elementary. And we call it model and teach for the upper elementary. This is your time where you are reviewing the upcoming lesson with them. You have some guided script that helps you. You can personalize it for your own child as you're talking. You've got a sample little paragraph or a story or whatever the assignment is that you can also review with your kids and go over. And part of your discussion can be born out of that, so that you don't have to start from scratch yourself either. So you've got this week of starting out with games and teaching time. And then what else are the steps? What other things can you do in bits and pieces? You can brainstorm with your kids in a small bit. And that's another thing that helps reluctant writers, is to have some kind of a graphic organizer or a brainstorming worksheet. And this, I'm talking, when you're working with a kindergartner, their story is going to be 3 to 5 sentences long. It's not going to be a paragraph. They're probably not writing in kindergarten or first grade enough to get their words down. So you're doing the writing for them as they tell you what they want to say. It may be a prompt that comes from things you're asking them. It may be a picture that they draw, and you are asking questions about the picture, helping them formulate it into a good sentence, and then you write it down underneath the picture. So when I talk about writing, it looks different depending on the age of your child, their physical ability to write, their willingness to write, their perfectionism, all these things that we've mentioned. These are all play into it. But if you've got something that you can help your child use to organize the writing, a graphic organizer of some kind, and if you haven't seen one, it's basically just, well, there's so many different kinds, but like one, you just put title at the top, beginning, middle, end. And it just gives you some space to figure out what are some things that can happen at the beginning of our story. What are some things that can happen at the middle? How can we work towards solving a problem? what happens at the end? How do we wrap up our story? Some graphic organizers are grids, some are charts, some are Venn diagrams. Again, depending on the age of your child, the kind of writing assignment, but these help your kids organize their writing. Because if they are expected to go from brain to paper, there's a whole lot that can happen in between that you've missed. And the graphic organizer is the very thing that helps them get their ideas out, do kind of like a brain dump of all their thoughts, and get them down so that when it's time to write, which happens in a different session, because remember, we're doing this in steps and stages. So a couple of days later, they write based on their brainstorming. Now, so you've got the graphic organizer, you've got the writing is the thing that comes next. It's going to be their rough draft. This is going to help your perfectionist understand that writing does not have to be perfect the first time. No writer ever publishes a first draft. They always have to revise, and sometimes many times. And so right now we're working on a revision of a product that we created 15 or 20 years ago. It is so out of date. It needs revision, and we're spending a lot of time on that. So it's part of the process. So the kids brainstorm, they write, they self-edit, they need a checklist that helps them have confidence to know that they're looking for the right things, and they don't have to guess, because they'll say to you, I don't need to fix this. It looks good just the way it is. Why? Because they don't want to have to rewrite it, because I hate writing. Or they just really don't see their errors. That's another reason it's good to do things in stages, because it's great, especially for kids who are getting to be more independent in their writing, to have a little bit of distance between their rough draft and their editing. It gives time for the cobwebs to clear, time for them to be able to think more clearly about what they are wanting to say, and to be able to be a little bit more willing to make some changes. So that's something else to consider when you're teaching your kids, making sure that you're spreading things out. And then the final thing they will do is write a final draft. At the younger levels, we encourage them to publish their projects, their writing stories, whatever, in a creative way. And so in our junior level, and so this is from our WriteShop primary is our early elementary level, WriteShop junior is our upper elementary, and all of the levels give kids ideas for publishing their projects in some kind of a creative, crafty way. If your kid isn't crafty, that's okay. You also have suggestions for just making it into a neat copy, whether it's typed or neatly handwritten. So again, taking your kids through this process, suddenly they have a final draft. They didn't start with a blank page and end up that way. They went through the stages over 2 to 3 weeks and ended up with something that they could be proud of. So that is really important for every learner, but if you have a special needs learner, a reluctant writer, a struggling writer, going through the steps of the process is absolutely imperative. Do not expect or ask them to do it all in a day or 2 days or 3. Give them time, spread it out, make it manageable for them so that they don't feel overwhelmed and defeated before they even set out the door. Another thing that some of you mentioned was that topics are boring. What do you do when your kids say, writing is just boring for me? I don't like to write. I don't want to write. I don't want to write about that. How many of you have heard that come out of your kid's mouth? I don't want to write about that. So giving your kids some freedom and flexibility is great. You can go too far, and I've seen this happen too. So be careful not to tell your kids, write about whatever you want. That can strike the death knell for many reluctant writers. You think it's giving them lots of freedom, right? Hey, write about whatever you want. And what it means to your child is, Mom just dropped me into the ocean from a helicopter and flew away. I don't know which direction to swim to get to shore. I don't know how far it is. Does this make sense? When you just tell your kid to write whatever you want, you give them too much freedom and it overwhelms them. So you can give them some basic topics. For instance, in our WriteShop programs, let's say in a fourth grade, you have a fourth grader, a 9-year-old, and their topic might be an adventure story. Again, the adventure genre is pretty broad, and so but you still can give them some flexibility. So within the adventure genre, the WriteShop lesson will break it down and give ideas. So in this particular one, it may be we're going to write an adventure story that takes place. We need to have a place that happens, a character, and a problem. What is going to happen in our adventure? And there are games you can play to help your kids get their topics. There are spinners that they make, and it makes it so much more fun to come up with their ideas. So the spinner might say a person you know. It doesn't say you have to write about this particular person. And it gives them some options for the place. It can be, maybe it's in the Arctic, or it's in a library, or and they can pick and choose, they can mix and match, and they can come up with their own idea, but they're still writing an adventure story. And all the instructions will point them to their cool adventure story without telling them they have to be limited to a particular topic. Giving your kids flexibility helps them be vested in the assignment, and when they feel like they have a say in what they write about, they're going to give you more. They're going to invest more in that assignment. We're still stuck at this, but my kid, physically, pencil, pen, paper thing. Okay, so we need to revisit that because it's really important. And I've talked about this, I think, in every Facebook Live that I have done in Top Picks, because it is so important. And that is, don't be afraid to let your child dictate to you. It's important to find alternative ways for your kids to adapt. For some kids, especially older ones, they can learn to type. Others can use speech-to-text, technology, apps, whatever. Those are all fine. But especially when they're younger, it's great to be their scribe. Let them tell you what they want to say. Not only can you hold the thought long enough to get it down, you can also pause them. You can ask leading questions, redirect, help them formulate complete sentences by asking questions and asking them to repeat. So if you ask a question and they answer with 2 words, you can rephrase it or help them rephrase it. Let's say that as a complete sentence. And then if they don't know how to do that, you model it for them, ask them to repeat it back and say, that's great, let's write that down. So you're doing that modeling for them. And what this does is it lets them have the freedom to think about ideas, to mess around with things in their brains without the fear and limitation of having to also write those things down. You are going to get way more mature writing out of your kids if you are their scribe than if they are writing it themselves. Now, at a certain point when they are able to write by themselves, they need to do that. They do. But when they can't, like with Ben, oh my word, he was so verbal and had such a huge vocabulary that I would write his stories, and we would maybe little reports. I would have to read to him because he wasn't a good reader even at 8 or 9. And then he would tell me his report orally, and I would write it down. I look back now and realize if I hadn't captured those thoughts on paper, if I didn't have a record of those words, I wouldn't remember quite how verbal and bright he was at that age, because I was so caught up in his struggles to write, to read, to do math, that sometimes I lost the vision. And even though I was scribing for him, I was still frustrated that he wasn't doing it himself. So one of the things that I like to encourage parents, and this is not, oh, I was such a great mom, I was such a great homeschooler, but just to say, hey, what you see in your 7-year-old or your 12-year-old or your 15-year-old is not an indicator of what your child could be as an adult. Fast forward, Ben went to college straight out of high school. He went to a 4-year university. He went on a partial scholarship. He debated all through high school, so he also had a debate scholarship. And he went on to get a master's degree and a PhD. This was the boy who couldn't put pencil to paper. This was the boy who hated to write. You can't hate to write and write a dissertation when you're preparing for a PhD, a master's degree, even in college, all the writing that you have to do. I just want to tell you that to encourage you. You may not have a strong academic mind, your child, and that's okay. He doesn't have to become an academic, but just bear in mind that he's still growing. Your daughter is still maturing. There are years to come where you can pour yourself into your children and help them along the way to become stronger and better. So being that scribe is a huge part of this process. The final thing I want to talk about is you, parents, moms and dads, you guys and your own struggles with teaching writing. Some of you commented that you don't know how to teach writing. Sometimes it's because you really never learned. You don't feel like you're a strong writer, so you feel a little intimidated by the idea of teaching your own kids. For some of you, it may be that you adore writing. It comes easily to you. You would rather type at the computer or scrawl out in your journal than just about anything. And yet, you don't know how to communicate your love and knowledge and intuition for writing to your squirrely, squirming 8-year-old son. And so that's a reality. That's a hard thing. A couple of things. When you are faced with teaching a subject that is unfamiliar to you, what do? You look for something that's going to give you a leg up. So you find a program that's step by step for the teacher that tells you exactly what you need to do, that it's not vague in its expectations. It doesn't just give you an assignment for your child, because not only does your child need to learn how to write, you need to learn how to teach, and you can't do that just by osmosis. You need to study to learn. And who has time to sit and take a course on how to teach writing, right? Who has time? That's as homeschoolers. We learn with our children. I learned so much with my kids over the 15 years that we homeschooled. And so, yeah, that's part of the process. So a program like WriteShop is just one of many. And honestly, moms, I love WriteShop. It's my baby. But it's not going to be the program for everybody. Some of the things that I'm sharing with you will apply no matter what writing program you use. And that's okay. That's why there are so many options out there. But if you're looking for something that is step-by-step, incremental, lays it all out for you, gives you schedules, tells you what to do, when to do it, then WriteShop is going to be really helpful for you. But having something that explains the process to you, that tells you how to help your child edit, gives you objective rubrics so that you're not just picking things out of the sky and thinking, I don't know, if this is right or wrong. I don't know if I'm being too hard on them. I guess I'll give it a B plus because it doesn't feel like an A. All of that stuff can go right out the window if you have a program that equips you as parents to teach a subject that is really hard for you. The same thing goes for grading writing, and I already mentioned the checklist, but also having rubrics that help you break down the writing assignment into measurable steps. Believe it or not, even though writing feels really subjective, there are a lot of things that you can quantify, a lot of things you can measure. And as your child improves in writing skills and writing style, those things contribute to how well an assignment starts to show up on paper. So even for your teenagers, when it gets harder and harder to do the editing and grading, when you have tools at your disposal, it's really helpful. For some of you, it may mean looking for a video course. For WriteShop, we don't have video courses for the younger levels because they really are parent partnership programs. You're working with your child daily, you're playing games together, you've got the scripted conversations, and step by step through every activity that just makes it fun and easy to communicate the writing topics to your kids, and also the editing. You're editing side by side with your child. When they get into junior high and high school, WriteShop 1 and 2 are going to provide tools for your child to self-edit with confidence, and also for you to be able to edit and grade objectively. And then the very last thing that I want to mention is for those of you who said, I've put off writing for too long. Is it too late? And no, it is never too late. It is never too late. You can jump in wherever your child is. If you haven't done any formal writing and you have a 12 or 13-year-old, you can plop them into WriteShop 1 just the same as if they have already been writing for a long time, because there will be something to learn for the reluctant writer and something to learn for the motivated writer. Usually your motivated writers take rabbit trails, they take tangents, they have so much in their heads, they get disjointed in their writing, and they can learn to be more focused and organized, choose stronger words, organize their sentences better, write clearer, more mature sentences. So any kind of writer can just jump in right where they are. So don't ever feel like you have to go back to the beginning. It is so unfair to a struggling fifth grader to have to go back to what, even though it doesn't say second grade on book B, you may think, oh, we haven't covered this stuff. Your child is going to know he's not doing fifth grade work. It's better to put him in the book for the 10-year-old that's age appropriate. We have a placement quiz on our website. And here's what I want you to do. If you're still listening, here's a little bonus for you. If you go to writeshop.com/placement and take the placement quiz and take a screenshot of your results and post it in the comments, then we're going to put you in a contest for a teacher's manual of your choice. So there's your assignment. But anyway, yeah, put them in the level that best fits their thinking skills, not their ability to physically write. Okay, so lots of stuff we talked about today. I hope you take a nugget or two back to your homeschool table this week even, and try something to encourage you and your child in your homeschooling. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. If you have questions, you can leave them in the comments. Please check out writeshop.com. We have in our vendor booth here, we also have writeshop.com/shop, which is our store, and you can check out our products there. And we're here through Top Picks. We're available. We'll be vendors continuing, so we're always available and around to answer questions for you. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and happy writing.